Let's have a conversation.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Happy Friday. Let's have a conversation. How y'all doing? I hope y'all days, weeks. I hope your month of January has been going good so far. How's everybody's week going so far? We are here. It's Friday night. I usually get on for these 3 a.m. sessions, but nowadays I think I'm going to be on here a little bit earlier. How y'all doing? How you doing? I'm going to shower. This is going to be a long shower, huh? Hi, Charicity. It's early for you because you are usually on when I'm on here super late. I know you're at a different time zone than me, but it doesn't matter what time I'm on. If I was on 6 o'clock a.m. my time, if I was on 9 o'clock a.m., 3 o'clock a.m., you'll find a time to be here most of the time. It's Friday. You don't sleep. If there was a no sleep award, you'd be the one who was getting the award for no sleep. The no sleep award goes to Charicity. By the way, if y'all saw my thumbnail, what do you think of my thumbnail? My thumbnail was a picture of me from when I was, I don't know, 3, 4 years old, something like that. Back when the ugly sweater was the actual sweater that you would find in the store that your parents would put you in for school. Nowadays, the things that they make and call ugly sweaters were things that we actually wore because they were fashionable at the time. If I'm not on, it's because I was distracted watching TV. So aside from the shows that I know that you watch, what things do you watch on TV? Just out of curiosity. What kind of things do you watch when you turn on the TV? All right. Excuse me, y'all. Appreciate that. One thing that I have a lot of is pictures because my dad loved pictures. My family loved taking pictures. My grandpa loved taking pictures. Rest in peace to both of them. So we have tons and tons of pictures in the house. Yeah, I'm ready for your list because I don't watch that much TV, contrary to popular belief or, most people who have channels that cover TV shows watch tons of TV. But before this channel was up, the only thing that I was watching was pretty much sports and The Challenge. That was it. My family always had pics too. Yeah, my dad has so many pics that we still have. Pictures of him, pictures of us. Okay. Q&A session. I'm still waiting for the list. Okay, so it's Flashback Friday today. I had a few different ideas of what I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to leave it up to my audience. Give me a topic and I will give you something about that topic because I want this to be interactive. Y'all know I could just jump on here and talk about anything, but if the people who support the channel and want to see me talk about something specific, drop that in the chat and I will freestyle it. You know, I don't know any of those shows. Oh, but I do want to start watching, what's it called? Deal or No Deal Island. I do want to start watching that. I've never watched the regular Deal or No Deal, but because Deal or No Deal Island has so many people that I know from other shows, I'm interested. I've never gotten into The Bachelor. I never got into Deal or No Deal. I did see The Equalizer. I saw a few episodes of The Equalizer, if that's the show with Queen Latifah. How was your week, though, Charicity? I know that earlier you said your day was what'd you say? A 6.5 out of 10 or something like that. But how has your week been overall? My week, I'm making the most out of it. I am possibly gonna be on here more than I was before, and I'm thinking about, you know, how to rebrand this page in a sense, or I don't know if rebrand is the right word because I don't really need a rebrand per se, but the page is not structured, and I'm wondering if having more structure to it would benefit the consistency of the viewership. So that's kind of what I'm looking into. My week has been boring, which honestly this week honestly, sometimes weeks where things are boring and there's not a lot going on happen to be the best weeks, or times when nothing is going on happen to be the best times, because I know that sometimes I've had the tendency to feel like when somebody's like, how's everything going? How are you doing? And I'm like, oh, there's all these different things happening, you know? Sometimes no news is good news. Sometimes when things are calm and there's not a lot of things going on, sometimes those are the best times, but you don't realize that until those times are over and things are chaotic and hectic. So I'll take boring. Sometimes I'll take boring over a lot of action, depending on what the action is for. Okay, so there was an original topic that I was thinking in case I didn't get a topic given to me. Oh, I think I've told this story before, but I had it in my head. And this was a back in the day story, like a flashback Friday story. So I remember in my high school, this is back when I was living in Canada. And I went to this private school. Okay, so to rewind a little bit, I was born and raised in Canada, for those who don't know. And when I was about 13 years old, my dad went over to North Carolina, and he said that he was going for a job interview. Well, he didn't tell me, but I just thought he was visiting North Carolina. Come to find out, he went to North Carolina for a job interview at a university over there. He was presently an accountant, and he was going over there applying for a teaching job, which I didn't know. Right. So he was applying for this teaching job, and he got the job, and he accepted the job, and then he came back to Canada. And I had been in this one area for not my whole life, but the majority of my life. I was 13, and probably 8-9 years of my life I was living in this one town. And the town had the elementary school and the high school were basically right down the road from each other. And everybody knew each other because these were small private schools. And most of the people who graduated from that elementary school went right over to that same high school. And I had already applied for the high school. I had gotten into the high school. And I was actually even taking summer classes over there already. So he came back from NC and was like, "Hey, Mark, I have some great news. We're moving to North Carolina." I was like, "Que pasa? Moving?" That didn't even register with me at that time. I'm like, "Why are we moving to North Carolina?" His explanation to me was, "Thank you so much, Charicity." His explanation to me was, "Have you ever just done something and then gotten bored of what you're doing and wanted to do something else?" And I was like, "Yeah, I relate in a general sense. Yes, I have done something and gotten bored of that thing and wanted to do something else. But at the same time, moving to another country was not on my bingo card." You know what I'm saying? So all my friends were at this school and all my friends were going to this next school. I Canadian citizen. I'd been to the US to visit for different things, but I never lived there before in my life. And this was a big change that was being sprung on me. I want to say less than a month before my school year was about to start, because I had already applied for this new school, for this high school, and I got accepted. And like I said, I was already there taking summer classes. So me and my dad were at odds because of this decision that he made. And I went back and forth with him quite a bit. I was like, "I'm not going. I don't want to go." He was like, "You're my son. You don't have a choice but to go." And I argued with him. I told him whatever I could tell him to prevent myself from having to go to North Carolina, including telling him, like, "Hey, if you want me to go, you're going to have to drag me kicking and screaming. Like, if we go to a rest stop, I'm going to get out of the car and run." Like, I was just saying crazy things so that he wouldn't end up taking me to North Carolina. So what ended up happening is I actually succeeded in frustrating him. And he was like, "You know what? We're going to leave you here. You're going to stay in the dorm. Me and your mom are going to go to North Carolina, and you get your wish. You get to stay in this school in Canada by yourself," which at that point in time, I felt was the biggest win, because as a 13-year-old, you don't want to do something and you find a way to not have to do that thing that you were told that you have to do, it feels like a W. But when I got left in that dorm, it felt like a W and an L at the same time. I wanted to go to that school and I wanted to stay in Canada, but I wanted my parents to be there with me because at 13 years old, it's not the same as going off for college. You're 18, you're 19, you're 20 or whatever, and you're a little more mature and you're a little more prepared for that. And that's like the natural time to be away from your family. But at 13, I was one of the youngest people in that dorm. And I wasn't used to not having my parents around. And I also wasn't used to not having the structure because now you're in there with a bunch of people your age. And the only people who were successful at this are people who were just very disciplined. And I was not. I was not disciplined in any sort of way. I remember moving from the house I grew up in after my mom died. And it's a big deal to a kid to leave what you know. So I can only imagine at that age, it was a huge loss still. Yeah, so even though I ended up staying in my same town, I ended up staying in the same country. My parents were now, well, my dad was in North Carolina. My mom hadn't left just yet. My mom was still living in the house that I mostly grew up in, and I was still able to see her for a little bit of that first semester before she officially moved. But then I was on my own. The only people that I had were my grandparents who lived about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from me, but that's not a stone throw away. Oh, you were 16 when your mom passed? I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a young age for that kind of change. So I can only imagine what that must have been like. I was fortunate enough, to have both of my parents until how old was I? 2023. I guess I was 30, 35. I think I was 35 when my dad passed. So, I was fortunate to have both of my parents for that amount of time. Some people don't. I mean, some people have more time, some people have less, but I still consider my dad was young. My dad was 71 years old. I consider that as young. I spent an entire year. Every time my dad would say we were going home, I would say that's not my home. A funny story that I did not know until a few years ago. When I was born, my dad was in Africa. I was born in Canada. He's not there. And so when I was growing up, I grew up in my grandma's house. And it was my grandma, my grandpa, my aunt, and my mom, and me, and my sister. So there was like 6 of us there in the house, but my dad wasn't there. My dad was in Ghana, in Africa. So when I think when I was 3, almost 4, is when my dad decided to make the full-time choice to move to Canada and stay there permanently. And the place where my dad got a job in Canada was, like I said, about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from where my grandma was staying. So when he came and he was going to take me and my mom and take us to the place that we were going to ultimately be staying. But the home that I knew was my grandma's home. So my grandma told me this story about when my dad came and he was like, "Hey son, we're going to go home." And he said that I threw a fit. I was crying, I was screaming. I was like, "Where are you trying to take me?" And my grandma had to tell me, "Don't worry, this man is okay. He's safe. This is your dad. I know you haven't been seeing him, but this is your dad." And she told me that when I was leaving, like when we were getting in the car to leave that house, she had to tell me that I was just going over to visit this house that my dad was taking me to for the weekend, and that I was going to come back to her house on Monday, which was not true, but she said that was the only way that she could convince me to go. But I obviously adjusted, because honestly, as an adult, I didn't even remember that I lived in that house. I just thought we visited a lot, but little did I know that was the first house that I lived in. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It's tough. It's tough when people don't die of natural causes. Like my uncle that I mentioned earlier today, rest in peace to him. My grandfather had Alzheimer's. My uncle had multiple strokes. My dad had Alzheimer's and dementia. That's one of my biggest fears in life, is not to go of natural causes. The peacefully in your sleep thing. That's something that everybody hopes for, but a lot of people don't get. It's hard to see somebody who was strong and healthy for a significant portion of time, and then all of a sudden you see them and then they're sick and they're fighting for their life. I mean, that's always tough. Yeah, so anyways, when he left me in Canada, he was really upset about how much I fought him about him trying to take me to North Carolina. And I remember he gave me, I want to say maybe $100 or $150, and was like, "Here's a check. This is your money for the year, and I'll see you at Christmas." My mom, on the other hand, was breaking down. My mom was in tears. My mom was like devastated about leaving me at that dorm. She was clearly devastated. And I remember that $150, whatever it was, I ran out of that money probably the first month. A semester was like 4 months. I think within 1 month I had spent that money. The majority of what I spent it on was like ordering food, because we would order pizza in the dorm, we would order chicken, we would order. There was like Guyanese or Trinidadian restaurants nearby. I did not know how to manage money for anything, so I spent all the money on unnecessary things. Movies. I went to the movies sometimes with my friends, and then when I needed the money for things like toiletries, toilet paper, toothpaste, laundry detergent, that kind of stuff. I just did not have the money for it because I did not know how to budget in any kind of a way. It made me who I am. Losing my mom early, I learned how important people are. True. That is so true. You know what? I didn't learn that lesson early because everybody's life follows a different timeline. So in my life timeline, I went a long period of time feeling like people last forever. The first time I did not feel like that. There were 3 people in my high school. Okay, so this one guy in my high school, he was gifted a car from his parents for graduating from high school. These 4 guys wanted to drive his car, who wanted to drive in his car. So he gave one of them the key, and he was like, here, you can take the car. Y'all have fun and bring it back to me. So there was 4 of them in the car. And they were speeding in the car. They were going like 90 plus. And they lived in Massachusetts. So if anyone knows anything about the town of Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts, unless you're in Boston or like a city area, a lot of Massachusetts is country areas. And that means a lot of trees and a lot of like narrow 2-way highways and 2-way roads and 2-way winding roads. And the speed limits on those 2-way roads are like 30 miles an hour for a reason. Because you can't see people coming around on the other side, turning corners, sharp turns. And it's a lot of forest and trees and people hitting trees and animals is a large cause of death over there. I lived there for 6 years, so they took this car for a joyride, and they were like 2 to 3 minutes away from the destination that they were stopping at. And the driver of the car, lost control of the car. Hi, Brian. And then the car hit a tree and wrapped around the tree. 3 out of the 4 of them died. The driver, he died instantly. 2 of the 3 passengers were on life support. One of them had a broken leg, but he was conscious and he lived. He's still alive to this day. The other 2 of them, the one died instantly, like I said. The other 2 of them were taken off of the life support, and they died, the same day they were taken off of the life support. So I remember attending a memorial service that my school had for the 3 of them. And then I remember attending 3 funerals in a 2-day span. And it was one of the most horrific things that I can ever remember in life. One of the people was my very close friend, Victor. That was his name. He's my very close friend. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. She called you Big Brother Bro. Yeah, so I attended 3 funerals back to back to back, and that was the first time when I was like, life is not unlimited. Because everybody kind of knows that in theory, but you don't really know that in practice until you have that experience that shakes you up a little bit. And that was my experience because there was no way that I thought that I was going to lose that friend. That friend of mine, he was the smartest of our group. He was the person that we just knew was going places. Like, I just knew that this person was going to be some mega star. And then when I lost him, I was like, this is just, I can't believe this. I still remember going to his funeral in particular. And I remember the devastation of his parents and his sister. And it was oh so hard. But I never lost anyone in my family that early. I mean, I did. Everybody does. But I didn't lose anybody significant to me like that in my family until my grandfather, and I was already 22 at that time, and he was 87. So despite me feeling sad, I was also like, it's his time to go. I understand that. But yeah, when I was alone in that dorm, hey Nash, that was one of the hardest experiences in my life because even though I campaigned for my parents to leave me in Canada and leave me in that dorm, when it actually happened, I was like, what do I do? Because I had just never been without them. This is my first time not having my parents. And a lot of people always think that I always got good grades. I always was on good behavior in school. No. My high school years, okay, my high school GPA was a 1.87. That's what I graduated with. A 1.87. The principal knew me on a first name basis. I mean, not that I was in a big school, the principal knew everybody, but what I mean is me and the principal were in that office together frequently because I was often sent there on bad behavior. I failed a bunch of classes. I think a parent hits you a bit different though. I've lost a ton of others, but parents, as you know, hits a different place. It sure does. You probably experience a little bit of that. I mean, not this. It's not the same as losing them and permanently not having them. You know, not having them physically in your presence is not the same as not having them there. But yeah, probably a fraction of that feeling of loss I did feel when I was in school. I did feel a fraction of that. I can't imagine being that age though and losing one of them, but something that my grandma always tells me is like basically that everybody has their own story. Like some people, for an example, don't have the closeness that I've had with my grandparents on my mom's side. Some people are like very close with their actual parents, but they're not close with their grandparents. Some people don't even know their biological parents. Some people were adopted, but they love their adoptive parents as if they were their own. Like I love the person or people who raised me. I remember a classmate of mine, he knew his parents, like his parents were somewhat involved. But he lived with his grandparents. Like his grandparents were his primary caretakers. He would see his parents alternate weekends. Like he would see his mom one weekend, and he would see his dad one weekend, and it went like that. But the whole rest of the time, he lived with his grandparents. We actually used to make fun of him. I'm not bragging about that at all. But as kids, when you see things that are non-traditional, you laugh at them. And in his case, he was in our school. He's like 10, 11, 12 years old. And the people coming to the parent-teacher conferences are like 60s and 70s. And all of our parents are, at that time, 30s, maybe 40s. But it's a blessing to have people who step up to the plate when the people that you expect to be there are not able to do that. And he had those grandparents up until maybe 10 years ago. His grandparents passed when he was in his late 20s or so. I don't know I don't know what his relationship is like with his parents now, because I haven't spoken to him in some time. But my grandparents are more like my parents because of losing my mom. My grandmother and I were the closest. We lived with them in our house. Oh, you got a lot of experiences there, Charicity. You had a lot of life experiences. But I mean, it seems like they have shaped you into the person that you are now. Sometimes in times of like hardship, when you're in the hardship, you're like, why is this happening to me? But I feel like Kara said to me one time, the way that you respond to the things that happen to you, that's how you form your hero story. Okay, y'all, I'm going to be on here for about another 10 to 20 minutes. Let's put it in that range, 10 to 20 minutes. Yeah, you should write a book, because the things that you're dropping here, you drop them really casually, but they're actually really massive things to happen to a person. And I'm right behind you on that book, because I would like to write a book myself, but Mom and I lived with grandma. Only child, single parent. Grandma basically, that's basically the early parts of my story. I mean, not a single parent. I didn't have a single parent. I did have mom and dad, but like I said, dad was out of the country and mom worked a full-time job. So I spent more time with grandma and grandpa growing up than I did with mom and dad. And the funny thing about my grandparents is, I look at some of the grandparents of today And they're those grandparents that are like, oh, my little grandkids, I love you. Here's some money. You can do no wrong. I just want to play with you and hug you up and kiss you up and just take you to the amusement park and buy you toys. That was not my grandparents. I still remember all the things that happened with my grandparents, and I love them to death. My grandmother is my only remaining grandparent left. My maternal grandparents are the only ones I really know. Even though I met my paternal grandfather, I think I met him a handful of times maybe, but I didn't know him because he didn't live by me, so he wasn't there when I was being raised. But I still remember everything with my grandparents. Like, for an example, I remember if I would walk into a room, if I would wake up in the morning and walk into a room and not say good morning to everybody in the room, I was going to get it. I remember being taught about please and thank you, manners, things today where people are like, oh, you have such good manners. My grandparents, are who I got those manners from. When we were in that house, it wasn't fun and games. We had to do chores. We couldn't just sit down and just turn on the TV. We had to do chores. There was just a lot of rules. There was just a lot of rules. But I tell my grandmother to this day that I'm thankful for her not being those grandparents that just spoil the grandkids and the grandkids could do no wrong, and being the grandparents that made me work hard, that told me I have to be respectful to people, that taught me manners, values, discipline. I appreciate that. And the thing is, my relationship with my grandma evolved. Because I'll tell you something. I'm telling y'all that I appreciate this stuff now. I did not appreciate it when I was a kid. I was like, why are my grandparents so strict? And my friends' grandparents are just so happy that they exist. I don't understand. But then when I see how some of them turned out compared to how I turned out, I'm like, y'all didn't do so bad. I didn't get a chance to tell my grandfather that because my grandfather was older than my grandmother by about 12 years. And when he got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I was about 13, 14 years old. So we never had those type of conversations. But my grandmother, when I turned maybe 17, 18, 19, around that age, she was still strict in a sense, but she started to have more adult conversations with me at that point. She switched it up. My grandmother pretended to be like that to people. Yeah. To the day she died this last year at 90. I had to reel her in when I took her out. That's funny. My grandmother just turned 90, as y'all know. She just turned 90 last month, actually. December the 18th was her 90th birthday. My grandfather, her husband, lived until 87. So she has now outlived him by 3 years. But he was older than her, like I said. So He passed in 2009, and she was she was 75 when my grandfather passed, and they had been married 56 years at the time. And we were all scared because those stories of those couples that are like really, really in love and married for a long time, and then one of them passes, and then the other one passes not long after that because of heartbreak. I legitimately thought that could be her, but she's still here standing 15 years later. And I appreciate every minute, every day, every second that I continue to have with her. At her 90th birthday, she said, "We're going to do this again when I turn 100. And, I would love to have my grandma here 10 years from now at 100. We never know how much time they're going to get. So just the fact that she was speaking as if, she was going to be here to 100, that shows you the kind of life that she has in her. I've mentioned this before, but when I was born, she was in her mid 50s or so. I thought she was younger than my mom because she's such a vibrant person, vibrant spirit. I remember when I was living with her, 6:00 in the morning, we would hear all this noise in the living room. That was her doing her exercise videotapes. Her and my grandfather did so much for people who were retired, to the point that I didn't even know what retirement was. I'm like, what is retirement? I have no idea what that means. But yeah. I have about 2 more minutes that I'm going to be on here. But I want to take the time to thank everyone for joining me. Thank you to Charicity and Brian for the super chats. I particularly want to thank actually both Charicity and Brian for in Brian's case, I went through or have been going through a crisis recently, and Brian has helped to talk me through it, and Charicity has as well. But I'm still here. I'm still, continuing to be resilient. I'm continuing to keep going and just figure things out. Life takes twists and turns, and mine has taken some twists and turns. Mine has taken many twists and turns in the last 5 years. And there's a saying that I really like that says, it's not about how far you fall, it's how high you bounce. And I always bounce back from everything. Nothing really keeps me down. Even though, everybody feels down sometimes, nothing can really keep me down. I'm always going to get back up. We had to have manners, and Grandpa made sure. We always said, blank and I. Oh, yeah. Manners and grammar. Yeah. 60. My grandparents were married for 56 years. That's how long they were married. They're married for 56 years. They were the most in love couple that I had ever seen in my life, and I have never seen anything that compares to that ever in my life. Appreciate that, Nash. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Charicity. I agree. It's all going to be a chapter in the story, I hope. I am going to acknowledge, because sometimes I have a tendency to glance over my feelings, and that has never served me well in the past. I am going to acknowledge that I'm not feeling the greatest right now, but I do have some optimism that at some point down the line, I'm going to be like, this was one chapter of my story. And I'm glad that I made it through this chapter, because there's way better days ahead. And I've had times like that before, honestly. I've had really low times in my life, lower times than now, much lower. And I've come out of those times, so I can do it again. It is crazy. Similar age. They're almost the same age. Your grandma and my grandma, almost the same age. And grandparents were married nearly the same amount of time. So that is a crazy coincidence, actually. Sorry to hear that, Nash. I wish you didn't know how I feel, but I'm sorry to hear that you do. And, I'm hoping the same things for you that I'm hoping for myself. Genuinely. Life has its ups and downs. And the thing is, life has its ups and downs. They're a little bit harder when you're not prepared for the downs. But if you could prepare for everything, then it wouldn't be life. Every time you talk about them, I think of mine. I love it. I'm glad that brings you down memory lane. I miss my grandfather too. My grandfather was the strong, silent type. My grandmother is the one that is, she does all the talking. He was like a presence. It was like, how you have the two people, right? And you're getting in trouble. And one of them will just lecture you to death, and the other one comes with a belt. He was the belt guy. He didn't give you any long lectures. He would just bring the belt, and then the belt would talk to you. You see him coming, and you're like, oh, I better stop, because these were not dialogues of you explaining yourself. It was just like, here's the belt. If you want to talk, this is going to be longer. You're going to talk to the belt a little longer. And if you want to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, then you'll have a shorter conversation with the belt. My grandma was the one who was like tough with her words, but not with her actions. She'll give you a good lecture that you're not going to like, but she's not going to be too hard on you when it comes to like spankings and punishments and stuff. She was not the disciplinarian in that sense, but he was. Whereas my dad was a fusion of both. He will give you the long lecture and give you the belt. Matter of fact, sometimes his lectures were worse than the belt. One time I made a huge mistake. He was lecturing me, and he was going on and on and on with this lecture. It was going on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I was like, are you going to keep going with this, or are you just going to get the belt? I requested the belt because I was like, I would prefer the belt to this lecture that you're giving me. And did it stop the lecture? No. The lecture extended, and I got more with the belt than what I would have gotten if I hadn't made that comment. So I was like, next time, let him just do what he does. It's always going to be worse the more I respond. I got one of those, those jokes when people tell those jokes about the parents that your parent will ask you a question and then you answer it. And then they're like, don't talk back. But if you don't answer it, it's like, answer me when I'm talking to you, boy. That was dad. That was definitely dad. Grandpa was sick for the last 10 years, so he was a bit more quiet. But they were both a bit mouthy. My grandma's mean and emotional, then apologizes. Grandpa was rational. Everything my grandma... So, I probably got this from my grandma. My grandma doesn't apologize. She rarely apologizes, but everything she says, she means. And I can't lie. I'm like that. Now, that's not to say that everything that I say is right, but I don't have like lash out and say things that I don't mean type of statements. It's more like, maybe I didn't want to say that. Not like I wasn't thinking it, but maybe I did not want to say that to that person. But because I was pushed to a certain brink or limit, it came out. So the apology would be more like, I'm sorry for the way that I said that, or I'm sorry for the fact that I said that when I wasn't intending to. But it's not like me or my grandma are like, not the people that are like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I don't think I've ever really said that. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean what I said. Maybe occasionally when I'm really, really upset, but for the most part, I meant some part of it. Yeah, this is gonna hurt me more than it will hurt you. Yeah, my grandparents and my parents are on that, to be honest with you. My grandpa was extremely judgy. My grandma, who's still here, is like that. My mom is like that. My dad was like that. My grandma would be mean. My grandma would be mean when mad, like your mom would be disappointed with who you are. Oh, your mom would be disappointed with who you are. Yeah, my grandmother. So my grandmother was just kind of consistent around the board. She wasn't more mean when she was mad than she was in like a standard day. Funny enough. Maybe my grandfather was a little bit like that. Like he would be meaner when he was upset. My dad was definitely like that. He was definitely like really, really mean when he was turned up. But my grandmother was just consistent across the board. Okay, y'all. I want to thank everybody for joining me. I did end up staying here for an hour, even though I thought I was going to be here for like half an hour. I appreciate y'all, and please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notified of when I drop some more great content. Thank you all, and have an amazing day.